Let's begin. We're going to conclude our course on Shakespeare with a study of what for many is Shakespeare's greatest play and most profound work, at least by many critics' standards. In about 100 years ago, there was a work on Shakespeare's tragedies, and the four tragedies of Lear, Hamlet, Macbeth, and Othello. Bradley's work on Shakespeare's tragedies put these four together, and I think his reasoning for doing so we might question, but his judgment is probably pretty accurate. I think they are probably his greatest tragedies, although there are many of his plays that are tragedies that are perhaps better known, like Romeo and Juliet, which is regularly performed, and it is a tragedy. But I don't think it has the gravitas that Hamlet does. And yet, although it is a tragedy, and it will have many of the features of the tragedy that we've already seen in Macbeth and Lear, it is a little bit more of a problem play than a straight out tragedy. And the fact that it's a problem play, as in we're not quite sure how to read it and what to understand by it, is probably what has made it its greatest tragedy, or considered to be the greatest tragedy. The problem is rooted in the main character of Hamlet himself. Hamlet is a great figure in many ways, but he is a man who is incapable of action. And that makes him very different than the normal Shakespearean heroes. I can't see any lack of decisiveness as being characteristic of a Shakespearean hero besides this. We have had heroes, we've already explored a couple of them, like Prospero and Duke Vincentio, who have been unwilling to act and get their hands dirty and be involved in the day-to-day hurly-burly of political life. They'd rather study. They would rather busy themselves in the contemplative life, in a sort of quasi-monastic life. They enjoy a vivid internal life, and they enjoy thinking and reading and engaging in discussion the way academics do. Hamlet is of that sort, but that's not what paralyzes him, and it is more of a paralysis than just a predisposition towards thinking. And so his inability to carry out revenge and a course of revenge, which he set on right at the outset of the play, is what makes the play so intriguing. And what is also interesting is that from that sense of paralysis, he's not completely debilitated. He thinks and orchestrates events to try and bring out about a certain outcome. The main purpose of his actions is to make certain for himself that the course of revenge that he's set upon by his father's ghost is in fact a just course of action, and not one that has been inspired by demons, so that he does something that is damnable. It's not that he's doing right, he needs to know in his soul that it's right. He needs to be satisfied of that fact. So he's very much of a man who has a conscience and an awareness of eternal things. He's not a hot-blooded character. He's cool, detached, and it's not that he's incapable of action temperamentally. We have no indication that is the case. So he's not like a Prospero or, again, like Duke Vincentio, that just didn't want to do it at all. We're not given any indication that is the case. He just wants to make certain that he's doing the right thing. before he's willing to act. And in that sense, he is very much of the Renaissance man. Remember, a Renaissance man is somebody that can marry thought and action. So understand with acuity and precision the way the world is, and then be prepared to act accordingly. And that's the ideal of the education of the day as well. You're studying and you're reading the classical texts in Greek, in Roman, in Latin, in Hebrew even. Not right yet, but very soon, early 17th century, huge explosion of interest in the study of Hebrew. And scholars like Milton, who comes shortly after Shakespeare, there's some overlap, and writes on Shakespeare's death, does Milton, will not only read Hebrew, but also write in Hebrew. So write in Greek, write in Latin, write in Hebrew. Queen Elizabeth did the same. So she was reading the original text, writing in them, and at the same time she was the Queen of England and was expected to act accordingly. So very much, this is a very intellectual age, but this is an age still that values action and is characterized by action. And they recognize the dangers of being trapped in one or the other. And Shakespeare regularly portrays that in his plays through figures that represent one or the other. And particular presents rulers who are thinkers but not doers, as delinquent in their duties. You can't just be knowers of the truth, you have to be doers of it, especially if you're in the position of political leadership. Action is a requirement of the office. And Hamlet, as the Prince of Denmark, is going to achieve that office when his father dies. I think we need to talk about that fact as well. Hamlet's father has been slain, and that makes him the young prince, I would have thought, the heir apparent. He is the man who should step into his father's place. He's the prospective king of Denmark. And furthermore, and to add to something of the pressure on this, he's extraordinarily popular. The people like Hamlet. He's not just in the dynastic succession, the heir, but people really would like him to be in a position where he is exercising authority. So that's the dilemma there. And Hamlet's sense of hesitancy has been variously explained. And whenever there's a character who is incapable of action, paralyzed, and the paralysis is marked also by a strong and appealing character, people want to know why he wouldn't do this, and speculation ensues, and explanations for that will ensue. And so there's a great deal that's been written about this, Hamlet's character. And so this is very much, and this is the Romantics' emphasis, they see Hamlet as the quintessential poetic figure, like themselves, so preoccupied with their own feelings and thoughts that action becomes difficult for themselves. So he's a projection almost of romantic sensibilities. And it is actually, and I don't know if I mentioned this or not when I introduced the course either, it was the Romantics, the early 19th century English poets, critics, particularly Coleridge, but not just Coleridge, who give Shakespeare the estimation that he has to this very day. And they primarily because they see Shakespeare as somebody who explores the inner life of character in a way that the Romantics find is both laudable and interesting, and see it as the advancement of human civilization, the exploration of psychology. And you've heard me say in some occasions, some of you more than others, that this development of psychology eclipses theology in the realm of not just the university, but life in general. The belief that psychology is the expression of human nature grows after the Romantics. And they pin that on the great figure of Shakespeare. the poet John Keats calls Shakespeare myriad-minded Shakespeare. 1,000 minds. He's able to inhabit characters through empathy. He knows what it's like to think as Hamlet, but also as Claudius and also as Hamlet's mother, and he presents plausible characters because he has what they say, and what, again, using Keats' phrase, he has this capacity for negative capability. Now, what is negative capability? It's the ability to basically negate your own person and your own prejudices and your own personality when presenting other characters. And that is the very thing that allows those characters to become plausible. That's Shakespeare. That's Keats' explanation for Shakespeare's terrific capacity for presenting the moral awareness of different types of people in different stations in life, whether they're kings or they're peasants or they're aristocrats, or if they're your common people, whether they're scoundrels or whether they're heroic. He presents them in a plausible, relatable, appealing way very quickly. And I think that is actually true of Shakespeare. And it's also true of Charles Dickens and a few other notable writers. This ability to present character and the moral awareness that comes with the station of life. And there is an ability on the writer that Shakespeare evinces that we do admire and makes the play so good. And so if you're an actor, all good actors want to play in Shakespearean plays, precisely for this reason. It allows them to play a really interesting character. Even if it's a minor character, it's still an interesting character. It allows you a little bit of scope, not to interpret the role, but also the lines to interact and make you an important character, even if you're a minor character. And then if you get to play Hamlet, well, this is the crown, this is the summit of your career. You get to play Hamlet, the figure of Hamlet, because Hamlet is an endlessly fascinating, complicated figure. Who doesn't want to do that if acting is of interest to you? So this is my explanation for why Hamlet, the play Hamlet, is seen to be so important, because of all that. Let me give you a brief overview here. Let's talk about the sources first of all. I think we can say that Shakespeare is designing the play Hamlet based on sources. I'll talk about the sources in a sec. With the intention of making Hamlet himself the center of the action, in a way that Macbeth was as well, truthfully, and Lear was as well. So they are explorations of character and motivation. In all of them, they're named after the principal character. And Shakespeare makes it more problematic because he deviates from his sources. So let's talk about the dramatic models that are his sources. In general, what he is following is the so-called revenge tragedy. So Thomas Kyd in 1592 writes a play called The Spanish Tragedy, in which Hieronymo is the name of the protagonist. His son is killed, and he seeks revenge on those that killed his son. So it's the reversal of Hamlet, the father seeking revenge rather than the son revenging himself on the father. And a ghost appears on stage, and Hieronymo feigns madness in the same way that Hamlet does. So I suspect, although I don't know, but I have good reasons to suspect that Shakespeare has seen Kyd's Spanish Tragedy, and the course of action to execute revenge is probably an expectation of the audience. In this case, a sibling is killed. In Hamlet's case, the father. In the Spanish Tragedy, the son, but feigns madness in order to execute his revenge. So there's a sort of careful plot and intent to do that. But he has a further source here, and so it's quasi-historical. And one of them is in the a writer from 1200 called Saxo Grammaticus. I forgot. Oh, there it is. Short. And in Saxo Grammaticus' account, he writes of a king of Denmark who was murdered by his brother, went on to marry his brother's wife, and the son of the slain king, his name is Hamlet, with a B, Hamlet, and he seeks revenge, feigns madness, is tested by the new king, gives himself away, rebukes his mother, becomes reconciled with her, returns from England, gets his revenge. So it's a story told by Saxo Grammaticus, which is repeated in a play much closer to the source now. I think it's 1572. Let me look at my notes. I think it's 76, sorry. Bell Forest, in which all these events take place, but there's no ghost. And there's no play within the play. So what we see in Hamlet, Hamlet decides in order to catch the conscience of the king, the play is the thing. We're in to catch the conscience of the thing. He puts on a play, has King Claudius and his mother sit and watch the play, and what they see in the play is the murder of a brother. And then he sits there and watches him to see whether he gives himself away in the action. And if he does, now I know how to act. That is invented by Shakespeare. That's not in Saxo Grammaticus, and it's not within Bell Forest either. And in Bell Forest, there's no ghost, furthermore. So Shakespeare throws those in there. And as I say, probably takes the ghost from the Spanish tragedy. So there's a blending of sources there, I think we could say, possibly. And yet Shakespeare uses them in his own unique way. All these things are interesting comments just in general, the way artists use sources and don't feel the need to replicate down to literal fidelity. They feel, okay, but I want to make a slightly different point in the original source, so I'm going to change the order of events or the sequence or even the characters for different purposes. And Shakespeare's very happy to do that. And in that sense, there's some originality, but note that he's using the stories that he's already been given. And in general, this is one of the reasons why we read great books, is they tend to have great stories that are worth repeating. Let's beg, borrow, and steal from other writers before us. You don't have to invent things out of nothing. What's interesting, and this is what makes it such a psychologically interesting play, in Shakespeare's version of Hamlet, there are no obstacles observable to Hamlet's revenge. There's no impediment, no external impediments, but there are internal ones. As in, he objects to his own course of action, which is commended to him. So his father's ghost says, this is what happened, avenge me. And Hamlet could then just go and do it, and he doesn't. So it's his own conscience that stops him. And that idea of a conscience as a motivation for inaction or for action is really important in the play. So what we're seeing here in this period, and it is very much to some degree a Protestant invention, is the importance of conscience as an objection against action and wrong action. Even over what authority is saying to him. So it is Hamlet's conscience, which is also what makes him appealing then. This is a moral man. He is aware of spiritual consequences of actions, and therefore these prevent him. Not his dedication to the philosophical life, but actually his commitment to theological truths and intellectual realities. These things are what prevent him from acting, not as a matter of temperament, but more of the situation he finds himself in. So how does the play begin? Well, Hamlet, he's at the court of Denmark. His father's recently died, and his mother has swiftly remarried his father's brother, Claudius, very quickly, unseemly quickly. Hamlet's disturbed by this, as any child would be. So dad's barely cold in the grave, and you've married his brother. That's distressing, difficult for the boy to handle. You know, it's a central figure in his life, his father. And now he's gone, and my mother's already remarried, and remarried who? His brother, and his brother is far inferior to his father. So Hamlet is upset, understandably, there. And adding to that, his ghost appears to him, that is his father's ghost, and tells Hamlet to kill his uncle out of vengeance. From this point on in the play, Hamlet acts irrationally. From this point onward, we have already seen the feigning of madness by, last time we looked at, what's his name? In King Lear, Edgar, who feigned madness. King Lear went mad. Edgar feigned madness. He feigned madness to avoid detection. Why did feigning madness work? Because you don't expect him to look like this, but also if you ever did find Edgar, the idea of him going mad would be, in some sense, understandable. Everyone would understand that Edgar went mad in this situation. And so it fits his internal reality to act in a mad fashion, even if he isn't altogether mad. One of the questions in the presentation of Edgar is how much of it is acting and how much of it is this is how he feels. And so it's easy for him to play this role. Similarly with Hamlet, his world has been turned upside down. Just think about the Elizabethan world picture and the importance of a king within the whole scheme of relationships. Remember that the king represents God, and the king is also his father, and so there are cycles and spheres of order represented, and all of them have been displaced in Hamlet's life. His father is gone, the king is gone, the representative of justice seems to be gone because a terrific injustice has been done. I mean, Hamlet's father claims that it was his very brother that slew him, like Cain slew his brother Abel. So huge injustice. All of these things have been destroyed in Hamlet's world. It's not just that his father has been died, it's that he's been slain, and his father just happens to be the king. And so the injustice of it all makes him question whether God is just in all of this. So as you can imagine, all of these things are pulled into the play. So then when Shakespeare's Hamlet is told by the ghost that he should slay his uncle, his response is to be irrational. And his irrationality is a very rational response. Like, what do we mean by reasonable? If the contradiction of everything good and true and just and beautiful is what has just happened to you, and the king is gone, and your mother's married the murderer, and your family's broken apart, and all the kingdom which could be vested in your power is something you're not ready to process yet and take on, then you're going to behave rather irrationally. So the question that we have and the actors have in playing Hamlet is how much of it is acting and how much is him just being himself. I think it's easy for him to act irrationally in this point. What we notice is he does say that at one point that he's going to put on an antic disposition. So it's an intentional. He's putting on the mask. He's playing a role, but it's an easy role for him to play. And also it's an easy one for other people to accept that he's gone mad. And that's one of the things that preserves his life, is that as the sympathy of others, everyone understands how hard this must be on the young Hamlet. And including his mother, Gertrude. Gertrude is particularly sympathetic towards her son. And Claudius, although he has murdered his brother, doesn't want to upset Gertrude. And so he feigns concern for Hamlet, which I don't think he actually has. I don't think he really cares about Hamlet. But he does care about Gertrude, and so he wants to find a way of getting rid of Hamlet without upsetting Gertrude. So he has gained the throne, and now he wants to secure it. And the only way he can secure it is through duplicity and having her work with him on this. So both of them, Claudius and Hamlet, are pulling strings. They're dramaturge figures. And we've already looked at the figure of a dramaturge figure in the plays repeatedly, seen it's an important role that represents Shakespeare's role as the playwright who is directing the action of the various actors. And he places these surrogates for the playwright in the plays that mirror his own actions. And further to that, he sees a responsibility in the dramaturge figures of teaching and promoting justice. So a good dramaturge figure is going to act in such a way that they bring about a marriage in the end. Or will orchestrate vengeance. But in either case, God's justice is demonstrated in the dramaturgy. So what we have in the form of Hamlet is such a character. He wants to do the right thing. And he manipulates others to get that outcome. We also have Claudius playing the exact same sort of role, except he is the opposite in his intentions. He wants to secure his ill-gotten throne, and he will orchestrate other characters as king, and they will do his bidding because he's the king, but his intentions are malign. He's a figure of evil. And so we have two dramaturge figures in the play. And one of them has power and the other doesn't. And the one that has power is the evil one. The one who lacks power is the legitimate one. And yet in this kingdom, just like we saw in King Lear, there is a question of legitimacy. And legitimacy, it gives reference to the lex, the law. And the question is the legal ruler actually a just ruler? What's the difference between law and justice? In the kingdom of Denmark, the legal ruler, Claudius, is an unjust man. He's a bad man. But to go against him is to be apparently against God, because God institutes and brings about rulers of men. Romans 13. He puts people in positions of power and authority. It's his doing. So Hamlet has a further problem here then, as somebody who believes that God ordains all things and puts men in positions of power. His father has been removed or murdered. His uncle has been placed in this position, and this is all God's doing. So what is he to do in this situation? We're going to add a little further complexity to it, and it's not my complexity. There's a subplot that's going on in the play, and that is that there is another figure that we will take interest in. He doesn't take a lot of playing time at the outset, and it's this character by the name of Fortinbras, Prince of Norway. If you don't know your Latin, fort is strong in bras arms, strong in arms. He's a man of action. And Fortinbras is also wanting vengeance because his father has been slain. Who slew his father? Hamlet's father. So the king of Denmark, Hamlet's father, has in battle slain Fortinbras Sr., and now Fortinbras Jr., it wants vengeance, and he's going to invade Denmark. That's how the play begins, actually. The play begins with men on the ramparts watching for a prospective invasion of Denmark from Norway. That's how the play begins. At the end of the play, Fortinbras will appear and will, in fact, overthrow Denmark. And he'll do so in an act of justice to avenge his father. And he will conclude the play and bring about a resolution. Happy ending for Fortinbras and the kingdom of Norway. Not very happy for Denmark and the king of Denmark. But then, is that not God's judgment? Was it not the case that both Hamlet's father, and had done something iniquitous to begin with, and his son is being punished for it? Because I think that's what's going on here in the broader picture. But that's the big circle on the outside, is this plot that involves Norway and Fortinbras, and then within that there's the whole story of Denmark and what's going on. So this is Norway on the outside. The play begins and ends with Norway's invasion being there, and then within that there's the story in Denmark, and then there is a story within that, and then there's a play within the play. So there are layers of plays going on. And the external realm of action, which begins and concludes the play, is what brings it about to closure and justice. But the focus of the play barely mentions Norway at all. It's important for the structure of the play that it happens, but in terms of the actual amount of time where we're engaging with the Norwegian king and his son, almost nothing. It's focused on the internal realm of corruption within the king of Denmark. There's something rotten in the kingdom of Denmark. There's something rotten. That's exactly what's it. So it's a portrait of a kingdom that has been brought down by the iniquity of its leader, Hamlet's father, which then spills over to his brother who kills his father, which is also iniquitous, and then Hamlet's deterioration. So there's a deterioration inward within Denmark that is only solved when Norway lances the boil, as it were. If that makes any sense. So Hamlet's father's ghost tells Hamlet to kill Claudius. At that point, Hamlet breaks down, acts irrationally the rest of the play, even when he's acting rationally, like putting on a play within the play in order to catch the conscience of the king. Okay, well now you see, and that happens fairly early on. It's in Act 2. And he knows, okay, I saw him. Did you mark him? Horatio, I marked him. I saw how he acted. Okay, well now we know. So let's go get him. Do they do that? No, they do not. So what prevents him at that point is initial problem is clear. He wants to make sure that he hasn't been deceived by some demonic being to do the wrong thing. But once he's clarified that for his own satisfaction, to satisfy his conscience, why doesn't he then act? Okay, well then that becomes more problematic. We'll have to look into that. But the crisis of the play actually comes when he does act in slaying Polonius. And he thinks that it's his father-in-law. He only does that when he's not thinking at all. And it almost seems like Hamlet is incapable of action because of his mental, psychological distress. He can only act impulsively. Only in those situations where he stops thinking is he capable of action. And we see that in the slaying of Polonius, and we also see it in the last scene when he kills Claudius and dies in the process because of the baited tip of the sword that had poison on it and so forth. But only then he can like lash out. But it's not a rational, ordered, purposeful, ethical action. It's impulsive. It's almost childlike. So that's all the foregrounding of it, but this is why it's such an interesting play. The critics are, I think, without exception, in agreement that Hamlet's character is the root of the problem and the chief interest in the play. Some will say he is inherently abnormal because he is skeptical. We'll look into that. He does use skeptical arguments. I'm going to talk about this because one of my observations, which I don't see too many critics picking up on, is that Hamlet is a Lutheran. He has been schooled where? Wittenberg, where the Reformation begins, where Martin Luther studied. He's been sent to Wittenberg for his studies along with his friend Horatio. And Denmark, to this day, is a Lutheran country. And when Shakespeare writes this, it's certainly the case that it is that. But by mentioning that he's gone to Wittenberg, he is, I think, expecting us to assume that he has certain theological views. And here's the problem. In Lutheran theology, the place that Catholics call purgatory is disputed. It doesn't exist. Luther says there's no mention of it in Scripture. And the whole practice of indulgences that the Catholic Church of the day is basically manipulating people to give money to the church so that they spend less time in purgatory. I want to find some evidence that that doctrine actually even exists in Scripture. This is a late invention of the church, and it's false, says Luther. Not just so the practice of indulgences is iniquitous because it's squeezing the poor for every last penny they have and making them in terror of purgatory, which they have no reason for even believing exists, but purgatory itself does not even exist. Okay, so that's the Lutheran position, more or less. This whole doctrine of that purgatory is there and that you need to do certain things in order to reduce your time in purgatory. Those are in dispute by Lutherans. But when Hamlet meets the ghost on the heath, he says that he is in torment, in a state like purgatory. He'll be satisfied when Hamlet avenges him on his brother. It's not very good Catholic theology if that's the case, because in the Catholic understanding of purgatory, you're not going to alleviate the suffering of your father by killing his brother. In which case, his father is probably in hell. And in fact, that's what Hamlet concludes, by the way, that his father's in hell. Why is he in hell? Because he died without confessing his sins. But according to Lutheran thinking, he didn't need to go through the sacrament of confession on his deathbed. So there's all sorts of complications there in all this. And all of this is confusing to Hamlet, who has seen this ghost, is convinced that the ghost is telling the truth, and yet he doesn't fit his theological categories. He doesn't fit the Lutheran view, he doesn't fit the Catholic view, and yet this ghost has stood in front of him, said things that he thinks are true, and he will prove to be true, and he's worried that he is under demonic possession himself. By listening, he's being led to some terrible act. And that's what prevents him from acting at the beginning of the play. That's my own observation. I have not read this in another scholar. It may be there by now, but I observed this decades ago now. Probably should have written it up, but I say that about a lot of things. That's not what the early critics say about Hamlet. They think that he is, so for Coleridge, Hamlet's a hero because he's just inherently different. He has an inner life that's so imaginative and so vivid that it overcomes his reality. like William Blake was said to do, like Percy Shelley was said to do. He has a vivid sense of imagination. So he's a figure that represents the imaginative man, just like the Romantics themselves. That's Coleridge's take, and he finds a lot of sympathy in his fellow Romantic authors. So his imagination overcomes his reality. Go back to what we said in A Midsummer Night's Dream about different types of imagination. For the Romantics, there is no such thing as a diseased imagination and a valid moral imagination. There's just the imagination. It's all good. And so he becomes a hero to the Romantic authors, but he's still abnormal. And so the German Romantic writer Schlegel says that he is thought sick. I don't remember what the phrase, I have it in English here, if it's Gedenkenskrank, I don't know. But he's thought sick. There's something wrong in his thoughts. He's melancholic. For the Freudian critics like Ernest Jones, and he writes an article called Hamlet and Oedipus, Hamlet is like a patient, and he has a repressed Oedipal drive that prevents him from action. How do we know this? Because the reason we're told that Shakespeare's Hamlet is incapable of action is because he really wanted to marry his mother, or at least have sex with his mother. Just like Oedipus did. There's a repressed Oedipal drive in Hamlet, and that's what's prevented him from action here. Is his uncle has managed to do the thing that he himself wanted to do, and that prevented him. Yeah, it's like, woo-hoo. There's little proof of this. I have seen this performed on stage where Hamlet gets on top of his mother and is sort of like feigning some sort of sexual act. I mean, to me, it's ridiculous. But it's like, what explains his lack of action? I think it's the theological explanation that is the most plausible in Shakespeare's day, given what you know about the differences between Catholic Lutheran theology and the problems that would ensue in the appearance of the ghost and so forth. One final critic, G. Wilson Knight, The Wheel of Fire, sees Hamlet infected by a death force. He blames all the deaths on himself. He's taking too much responsibility for everything. But I think the A.C. Bradley, the early 20th century critic, is closest to being right when he says that we can be sympathetic with Hamlet because Hamlet is a normal person placed in extremely abnormal circumstances. He's not inherently flawed. Remember, he is universally popular. He is a sort of a Renaissance man. And then bad things happen to him that destroy his world and cause him to act unusually. And his biggest problem is that he's a moral idealist, like Shakespeare. He believes that there's justice and there's goodness and there's beauty and there's order. And all of those things have been broken by the reality. Reality has mugged Hamlet. Hamlet wants to believe that there's a moral ideal in the world, and he is determined to bring it about, but he can't find his way. And only in the end, when Fortinbras comes in, is that moral reality able to be restored. Hamlet can't do it himself, although he's trying. He's moving in that direction, but it's too complicated for him. Some say that he's, and I think there's some warrant here, that Shakespeare may be influenced by skeptical ideas, which are very much fashionable in this day. You know, we can't trust appearances. But if that's the case, what we have here is a tragedy of moral idealism. That's Bradley's phrase. Let me stop that segment with that.